Is this the future of Football Manager's 3D graphics? Some of the Premier League specific imagery is impressive, of course. But is this really the culmination of years of hard work on the new 3D engine? And most importantly, is it really considerably better than what we had in FM24? And I know what you guys are thinking already, right? Oh man, here he comes again with another diss on Football Manager 26. But that's not entirely true. The thing is that there are some aspects of Football Manager 26's visuals that are clearly an improvement over earlier versions of the game. In fact, I'll show you all of that in a minute. The bigger question, though, is whether the improvements are worth all of the frustration, not to mention all of the damage that has been done to the Football Manager brand. First of all, though, we should probably go back in time a little bit and talk about why we have a 3D graphics engine to begin with. Back in the beginning, back when Championship Manager first came out in 1992, there were no in-match graphics at all. For almost a decade, the match engine showed you something like this. Your results were text only, which meant that you had to use your imagination. And it was like this for almost an entire decade. Now, if you're relatively new to the world of Football Manager, especially if you don't even remember the Championship Manager days, that approach might seem really quaint or even boring to you. But it was actually common to see sports sims that were set up just like this. Most other sports sims had limited to no sound and used a text-based interface to communicate the results directly to you. I played a bunch of these games growing up and became used to the concept of a text-only management sim. Of course, most of these games were extremely obscure, and none of them went quite as deep as Championship Manager. But these games are inventive, and I would argue that some of them can still compete with modern games even without the fancy graphics. You see, the thing is, when you're playing a text-based sim of a sport, your focus is entirely on the simulation aspects of the sport only. There aren't any graphic highlights to brag about or to stick on your YouTube Shorts feed or whatever kids do these days. But of course, the problem is that games without graphics tend to be too abstract for a mainstream audience. After all, most people want to actually see the games that they're playing, not just see it up here, but see it with their eyes. And the people who created these games knew this as far back as the mid-1980s. Well, at least some of them knew this. So for example, this is Micro League Baseball, which actually came out before that APBA Baseball text-only game I was just showing you. And as you can see, this looks like an ancient version of Out of the Park Baseball, and the results are displayed graphically rather than being textual descriptions. Best Play Pro Yaku came out on the Famicom back in 1988, and it was a management simulation game that happened to also have a graphical game engine. Remember that this simple game came out 4 years before the first Championship Manager game came out. Now, you also have to realize that there is a certain amount of elitism among those who prefer the text-only format. There are people who swear to this day, and will continue to do so for the rest of their lives, that Championship Manager 01-02 is actually the greatest football sim of all time, and they will tell you that the lack of any kind of graphical engine is what makes it perfect. Believe me, I know. I'm actually one of those people. While I do enjoy playing games like Out of the Park Baseball, the truth is that the 3D graphics really can get in the way. And the various 2D engines in the game give me so much trouble that I'm honestly not sure that it's even worth it. When it comes to serious simulation, honestly, I prefer the text-based variety, especially if the descriptions are vivid. This allows me to see the game in my head. And this is not just a baseball thing. For example, this APBA hockey game from the early 1990s is still much more immersive to me than the best of the modern sims. But Football Manager style games are just different, and actually Sports Interactive was under quite a bit of pressure early on to create at least some kind of graphical engine. The thing is that the competition was really good at sticking in at least some kind of graphics, and Sports Interactive was in danger of being left behind. I mean, Premier Manager 97 on the Mega Drive doesn't look like much these days. I'm still not sure what all of these buttons are supposed to do. The in-game engine looks a lot like early Football Manager though, with the added benefit of a few scoreboard animations to keep your attention. When Premier Manager 98 came out on the PlayStation the next year, the graphics took a major step forward. The match itself looked pretty standard, not really all that different from Championship Manager, and with a couple of key features conspicuously absent. When the match was complete, however, you got these highlights, including full match commentary.
The goalkeeper, well, the ball just sticks as he comes to meet him.
And I've got to wonder why in the world Sports Interactive still cannot include commentary with Football Manager today when its competitor could do this almost 30 years ago.
So, 1 against 1. And the goalkeeper gets the right way, but the pace of the ball beat him.
Of course, Premier Manager kind of cheated, right? The graphical engine wasn't live, and the game chiefly used a bunch of stock footage that they had pre-made to show you what happened after the fact. But the writing was on the wall, and Sports Interactive as a result started to shift programming resources over to creating at least some sort of graphical representation of its game to its fans. And that's where the 2D graphics engine comes from. Championship Manager 4 was the first game to include a graphical engine. This might look a little bit choppy to you, though that's likely because of the emulation I'm using. I think the original game was probably a lot smoother. Anyway, that particular 2D display was the centerpiece of Football Manager when I started playing back in FM 2006. Again, apologies for the choppiness, but I think you get the general idea. So for many of us, the heart of Football Manager for years and years was watching those little dots run after other little dots on the screen. All of your tactics and all of your hard work would be displayed in what felt like a very serious representation of the sport. And I mean, this was good enough, right? Well, maybe, but I can still see why people would be disappointed. Like I said, you have to remember that there were video games that could give you these kind of graphics way back in 1988. I don't know if anybody in Europe knew about this game, but then again, it wasn't the only one. International Superstars Soccer Deluxe featured great graphics and an announcing voice, and the game sprites gave off this almost 3D feeling. This is really impressive for a game from 1996, and this was worlds away from Sports Interactive in terms of in-match immersion. And I don't think that I need to mention arcade and Neo Geo games like the Super Sidekick series, also known as the Ultimate 11. So in some ways, the graphics behind games like that are actually better than in Football Manager 26. Now, of course, those games are different, right? They're not designed to be management sims. They're not designed to be realistic. But you still have to wonder why it is that it feels like we can't catch up even after 30 years of trying. Anyway, I think that desire to break out of the management niche market and go after a more mainstream market is precisely why Sports Interactive decided to give 3D a try. It was Football Manager 2009 that first saw the 3D match engine come out. Unfortunately, it was extremely buggy and struggles to run without crashing even on modern systems. As cool as it was to see your players running around, their animations weren't exactly convincing. You could choose from a bunch of different views, which was expected for an actual 3D engine. This was a pretty big jump up from having nothing but the 2D view, sure. This was also the first time we saw a 2D view that was different from 2D Classic. Unfortunately, as soon as I chose 2D Classic, the game crashed. Anyway, I don't know, maybe this was just my bad luck, or maybe it's what I deserve for trying to play it on an emulated version of Windows 10. But the thing is, I remember buying Football Manager 2009 way back in the day. In fact, I had recently purchased at that time an expensive and new gaming laptop from Best Buy, and you can probably tell where this is going. right? That laptop would get so hot when the 3D mode was on when I would play Football Manager that you could literally like roast marshmallows over the thing. I mean, it was hot to the touch. And if I tried to play more than one game in 3D in one sitting, the entire computer would overheat and just shut down. It would just go completely blank. So yeah, maybe in hindsight, I should have stuck with that 2D classic view after all. Now, if you're from the wrong side of the Atlantic like I am, you might remember that this game was called Worldwide Soccer Manager 2009 out our way. Of course, the new and improved 3D graphics remained the game's biggest selling point. And for some reason, I remember my copy being called Football Manager, but then again, I'm not sure where I bought it. Anyway, that was the year that IGN.com released an infamously scathing review of the game. This game is only intended for hardcore fans of the sport, they said. The incredibly complex menu system is impossible to navigate even with help, they said. Oh, wait. I thought FM26 was the game with the awful menu system. Well, now the truth is that the older games were not all that great in that aspect either. This was especially true if you were a casual gamer or somebody with like no FM experience, which I think was a requisite for writing for IGN. To be fair to the reviewer though, the old system's combination of a menu on the left and a drop-down menu on the top was really confusing. Anyway, then came the harsh review of the 3D match engine where stadiums lack personality or detail. I was going to tell you this was nonsense until I went back and watched that footage again. Yeah, this is pretty bad, especially when it comes to the lack of stadium detail. Oh, and look at this, there's no menu music, nor are there any sounds other than generic crowd noises. Boy, that reminds me of something. Oh yeah, that's right. Football Manager is exactly the same today. Now, the game did have music at one point in time, as you might remember. They got rid of the annoying menu music, which is probably a good thing because it really is annoying when you go back and play it. But the problem is that they replaced the music with absolutely nothing. I mean, Sensible World of Soccer came out as a CD-ROM game for the PC way back in 1996. We're talking over a decade before Football Manager 2009 was released. Now, I'm not going to play the classic goal-scoring superstar hero for you due to copyright concerns, but the truth is that this game is far more immersive and satisfying. After I foolishly decide to become the manager of Port Vale, I'm greeted by the owner who literally talks with me, I'm not kidding.
Welcome to our club. We look forward to much success from our new partnership.
Alright, sure, so maybe like meetings like that don't really mean that much, right? And maybe Swazi didn't have, 5,000 teams and 350,000 worldwide players like FM 2009 had. But even those little animations are really a nice touch. And that intro song, goal-scoring superstar hero, that really is catchy, and I'm not making that up. Go look it up on YouTube if you haven't heard it before. The studio behind Sensible World of Soccer put in a lot of time, effort, and money into this project, and it really shows. Sports Interactive, meanwhile, has always taken the easy way out. I mean, in those old Football Manager games, you wind up spending tons and tons of time just waiting for the stupid game to move on. It sure would be nice if there were a little bit of music to accompany these endless spinning screens. And given how much fun it is to navigate FM26, you probably should listen to something heavy and dark, maybe early Celtic Frost or something like that. Anyway, long story short, IGN was right. The graphics did kind of suck, the lack of music really was stupid, and the game really was only interesting if you were a freaking ridiculous geek for the sport. Now, I can get behind that line of thinking, and I really don't think that much has improved over the years. The final verdict, go play FIFA 09 or Pro Evolution Soccer 2009. The final score was 2 out of 10, a terrible rating, and perhaps a rating bad enough to destroy the game's chances for success across the pond. A few weeks later, IGN removed the awful review and apologized. IGN's spineless editorial staff said that you couldn't possibly compare a game like Worldwide Soccer Manager with competing games like FIFA and Pro Evolution Soccer. Now, in fairness to their editorial decision, the reviewer did sound like an idiot when he criticized Football Manager because the purpose of the game was, to manage football. But like I said, Sensible World of Soccer had menu sounds and other immersive things, plus it also had an announcer's voice and a perfectly fine graphics engine. Alright, I don't want to get too conspiratorial or anything like that. It's just really interesting to me that companies of a certain size and stature can get critical reviews of their products completely removed. This sort of reminds me of another gaming controversy that happened a couple of years later, one that wound up with a lot of political implications that I'm not going to get into now. Anyway, my point is that FM 2009 was kind of a step forward, but not really. But at least the team kept working on that 3D graphics engine. In my opinion, FM 2017 was likely the height of Sports Interactive's original graphical approach to the game. The graphics in this game are not perfect, but they are a lot better than in FM 2009. And in my opinion, some of the camera angles are actually superior to FM 26 and also FM 2024. In particular, this low behind the goal view, which I like to use for replays, is simply amazing, even though the player animations kind of suck. Just don't pay too much attention to the actual animations. You see, the biggest problem with that version of the 3D camera engine is that it was based entirely on the classic 2D engine. The game was really designed for 2D views, and the 3D stuff was just sort of like an extra representation on top of that 2D design. Though it might not look like much to a young YouTube audience, this 2D classic view is ideal if you're trying to figure out whether your tactic is working or not. It's this view that lets you see how the players are lining up, and as you can see here, their movements look fluid and natural. In contrast, if you wait for the replay to show up in 3D, you'll notice that the players do some strange things sometimes, and it looks like a lot of the guys are just walking around. Yeah, like I said, you don't want to look too closely at the player animations. However, to make up for the less than ideal animations, there were all sorts of camera views, including numerous camera angles that we haven't really seen since, and honestly, I don't understand why. This behind the corner view, for example, looks absolutely spectacular. I really don't understand why they got rid of this. The old main stand view was supposed to be like sitting in the upper deck of the stadium, though of course it's kind of silly in a small venue like this one. There were also views like this old rail camera view. While I don't quite understand the advantage of this viewpoint, at least it's something different. And that's the thing, there were a lot of viewpoints back in those days, stuff that was around just to be different if nothing else. Football Manager's 3D view options had only expanded since 2009, and the graphics engine was really making good progress, and then came FM 2018. As you likely remember, Football Manager 2018 included a new 3D graphics engine, which was supposedly the game's big selling point. There was all of this talk about DirectX 11 and motion capture animations, whatever that's supposed to mean. PC Gamer called this the most well-rounded version of the game yet, and that 89 out of 100 score was extremely positive, surely a lot better than what Football Manager 2009 deserved. But then when you look at the gameplay, you see this. Yeah, it was a step back. This was a big step back. All of the texture on the pitch, all of the fancy additional stuff, all of this stuff was just gone. And the thing is that Football Manager 2018 was actually quite controversial in the community. You might not remember it, but this is true. People on the official forum started rallying around the old 2D classic view, which was conspicuously missing in Football Manager 2018. FM 2018 defaulted to this new 2D view, which was horrible. Actually, it was the same new 2D view that had been in the game since Football Manager 2009. This is the one where the ball was bigger than the players. This is essentially the same 3D mode you see in Football Manager 2024, though they thankfully made the players a little bigger and the ball a little bit smaller. I suppose it's not awful, though I really hate playing through matches with this view because it seems so sluggish. I feel like I've been spoiled by the classic view, which really seems like the most natural way to play Football Manager. Anyway, you do have to wonder why in the world they got rid of that 2D classic mode. Now, I can tell you what the official word is from Sports Interactive, but I can't tell you that I fully believe it. A well-known admin replied to that forum post I showed you telling us that the 2D mode was holding back the development of the match engine. The interpretation in this thread is that there were going to be changes coming to the 3D graphics engine that would somehow invalidate the way the old 2D classic graphics engine worked. And of course, all of this coincided with blanket statements by Miles Jacobson about how nobody was going to play in 2D anymore anyway. Alright, I know what you guys are thinking, right? The majority of you weren't even playing Football Manager back when FM 2018 came out. And here I go again, taking more pot shots at Miles Jacobson, the surly old gaffer who takes most of the blame for Sports Interactive's many failings. I'm a bit harsh on him, I admit. But the thing is that in this case, it seems that the decision came from up above, and that all of these reasons why things absolutely had to change were simply excuses for a decision that had already been made and couldn't change because it came from the boss. And so you had pronouncements like this one from the man himself: over 90% exclusively used 3D in FM 2017, a statistic that I find very hard to believe. Now, I want to be clear, 3D angles like this TV view worked really well in Football Manager 2017. But the animations were really awkward, especially when players would collide or were tackled. The nice thing about the classic 2D mode is that you used your imagination to fill in the blanks. And most people knew this. Plus, of course, there were legions of Football Manager players on outdated hardware who suddenly now could no longer play the game. That should also sound familiar to you because that is precisely what happened with Football Manager 26 when it first came out. There's that old Steven Spielberg quote for you, right? It's like poetry, it rhymes. A prominent community member predicted that the 2D camera view would eventually disappear, something I honestly think we might see happen in the next 5 years. And honestly, I think sentiments like this still ring true today. The impressive effect of those 3D views wears off once you start getting seriously deep into your save. But the part that does not make sense to me is this persistent claim that the 2D classic view simply had to go for the graphics engine to make progress. Sports Interactive never clarified this point at all. Instead, Miles chimed in to reassure us that statistics we couldn't see fully supported the conclusion he had already come to. Now, the actual truth behind the situation is kind of murky, but what is clear in hindsight is that Sports Interactive had decided to work with a new contractor graphics developer to modernize those 3D graphics. That company put priority on the 3D graphical presentation and did what it needed to do to get the product out on time, which is why I believe that pesky things like, say, the 2D angles simply had to go. That contractor was Creative Assembly, another company owned by Sega that had worked on the old Total War games. And honestly, FM 2018 faced a pretty negative reaction, especially when the game was still in beta. Even the generally favorable reviews, like this one from Way Too Many Games, lambasted the Polygon New Gen face system. Honestly, I can't blame them. This face looks like garbage. This, of course, was years before Miles Jacobson made this cringe-worthy tweet, which only goes to show you just how bad that face generation system really is. And the one in FM 26 is no better. You see, for whatever reason, moving to this new graphics engine in Football Manager 2018 meant getting rid of everything that had worked before. New gen faces had looked perfectly fine up through Football Manager 2017. Once FM 2018 came out, however, we had to switch to these blotchy abominations that didn't look anything like real people. And it was so bad that the community eventually came up with its own solution. A lot of you remember the Nugan face pack that bore Zealand's name. This came out right around the full release of FM 21. Basically, the system uses a bunch of pre-generated AI faces that aren't of any actual people. You can extract information from the game that describes what the player looks like, and the system automatically matches them to the proper face. It doesn't work for FM 26 since Sports Interactive removed the ability to export data, but there are workarounds. The absolute best replacement these days is the NG Regen system, which includes an alternative way to read information from those pesky FM26 save files. It's a great system, though honestly I don't use it. I don't spend much time looking at those faces in the player profiles anyway. But the reason that I bring all of this up is that there's no coincidence that things started to get stale and repetitive as soon as Football Manager 2018 came out. The magic new graphics engine that Sports Interactive swore was going to improve everything wound up being a really big dud. FM 2024 is the height of that graphical system, but even then the 3D graphics don't look as sharp to me as they did in FM 2017. In particular, the behind the goal view seems a long way away, and I've got no idea what my keeper was even thinking here. The player animations are vastly improved, however, and you can also add on nice things like the sound pack that I'm using to get some commentary. But the biggest problem I have is that there is a lack of variety of views. So they took away all of the creative camera angles that we once had. In fact, there are only 6 3D camera angles in Football Manager 2024, and that includes Director, which is basically the same as the TV view 99% of the time. It just means that the game will change angles sometimes. And not coincidentally, there are also only 6 3D camera angles in Football Manager 26, unless of course you count that new mod that lets you move the camera wherever you want to move it. There were 15 different camera views in Football Manager 2017. Why did we go backwards? Now, to be fair to FM26, the graphics in some of these 3D camera angles are clearly superior to FM 2024. This behind the goal camera, for example, looks absolutely awesome in FM26. Sports Interactive did a really good job with this one. In contrast, the same view in Football Manager 2024 seems really distant and murky, especially when you're playing in a huge stadium like we are here. But then again, I still think the FM 2017 low behind the goal camera looks the best, as long as you can ignore the silly movements that the players make. Like I told you at the beginning, there are places where Football Manager 26 really looks good, but there are other places where it is severely lacking. To be honest, I'm not sure I completely understand what the purpose of this so-called tactical camera is. It looks like a worse and a harder to see version of that classic 2D mode that I keep talking about. The equivalent in FM 2024 is this sideline camera view, which is just as distant and pointless. Meanwhile, in FM 2017, the sideline view is a lot closer and actually has some 3D depth to it. It looks better than the equivalent view in FM 26. Like I said though, if you're playing FM 2017 or anything older, you might as well just move over to the 2D Classic view since you can see a lot more that way. And the FM 26 experience just gets worse from there, believe it or not. I'm serious when I say that I don't really see where the improved visual experience is, but you be the judge. This is the vertical scrolling camera in Football Manager 26. I'm not sure why you would want this view, but it's there if you want to see it. The same view in FM 2024 looks closer and a little bit more detailed. In FM 2017, there were 2 vertical scrolling views. This one was the one zoomed out a little bit. And this was the one that was zoomed in a bit, though I honestly think the FM 2024 view looks better. But the thing is, you used to have 2 views, now you have 1. So I don't know, maybe the statistics told them that nobody was using that view. But I've got some news for you. Even though you've only got 6 camera views in Football Manager 26, there are 2 views I guarantee that you will never use. The first is the 2D camera view, and I've already said way too much about this, right? The second one is what they call the aerial view, which is the worst idea Sports Interactive has ever come up with, and I'm serious about that. I mean, what is this, a game for ants? Now, why in the world you would want to play a game where you can't even see the players is totally beyond me. I mean, this is zoomed in all the way, and I still can't tell who is who. The FM 2024 equivalent is this data analyst view, and I honestly wanted to turn it off as soon as I started testing it out. It's just ridiculous. Meanwhile, FM 2017 gave us this for the data analyst view, and notice how it zoomed in a bit so you can, actually see the players. Once again though, there's really no point in using that view when you can just switch to the 2D Classic and have a full view of everything happening that is smooth and easy on the eyes. So the rule of thumb is that any camera views that are zoomed in tend to make Football Manager 26 look really good. Anything zoomed out, however, will make you feel like you're watching the game from like a blimp or a jet plane or the International Space Station or something like that. I mean, seriously, didn't anybody playtest this thing? Why did they think this was acceptable? And it's even worse when you look at all the talk and all the hype and the buildup that was behind this updated 3D engine. Back in June 2023, Miles Jacobson came out with his blog post that completely rocked the Football Manager world. Miles talked a lot about how Football Manager 2023 was the most played game in the series. FM23 hit over 5 million players if you combine all the various iterations, including console versions, which is pretty impressive considering that the franchise used to sell in the 2 million range every year. Interestingly enough, Miles makes this statement that is almost an apology for FM 2023 not being what the company really wanted. But in that great Miles Jacobson tradition, he assures us that the critics don't actually know anything about the game and that we should only trust whatever it is that the studio has to say. The big added feature in Football Manager 2023 was the squad planner, which didn't work right. It didn't work right in FM 2024, and in FM 26 it still does not work right. And to make up for this, they took away international management, which is something that has still not returned as of the filming of this video. That's the old Sports Interactive communication style, but that's another video for another day. Anyway, Miles admitted that the change to the graphics in FM 2018 were not ideal, especially from a customer service perspective. So you're telling me that moving from this view in FM 2017 to this view in FM 2018 wasn't actually a positive move from the customer perspective? You see, this is why we have these things we call discussions, right? You can get feedback from your community, the community that buys your game year in and year out, and you can find out that they don't really like having useful features stripped away for no reason. It's been almost a decade since Football Manager 2018 came out, and just like I showed you, we've got about a third of the 3D camera views that we once had. And views like the aerial view are just completely useless. This was the improvement that they backtracked on almost immediately. You can tell that Sports Interactive knew that the FM 2018 graphics were a mistake since they started this Project Dragonfly as early as January 2020. The original plan was to move the whole game to the Unity platform, which was what Project Dragonfly was all about, in time for FM 2022, but that was being delayed to FM 2025. And of course, this meant that FM 2025 would be the new watershed moment in Football Manager history, except for that inconvenient fact that, the game was never actually released. In the end, there were these generic promises of more graphical power, which would probably be more impressive if there wasn't so much obvious AI vibe coding slop in FM 26. So as I've said before, I'm bitter about FM 26 because the game still doesn't run on my machine. It crashes so frequently that it's a joke and it's unplayable. In fact, it is worse than that FM 2009 clip that I showed you earlier. However, I will give Sports Interactive credit for one thing. If you use the zoomed in camera views in FM 26, the game really does look a lot better. Even a deep cynic like me has to admit that. The broadcast camera looks awesome, though you can tell I've recorded this using the beta since the frame rate went down as soon as I collapsed the player list on the bottom. Graphics like this actually do make me a little bit excited for the future of this franchise. And this dynamic sideline camera is just as good, though it's honestly the same thing. This is basically the same thing as the old TV view, and the broadcast camera is the same as the old director view. But seriously, the players do look pretty good, and I do see the potential for future growth. So speaking of which, what is the future of this franchise exactly? I mean, are we actually going to see more visual improvements? Are they finally going to do something with the 2D camera angle once again? Well, one thing is for certain, they do need to figure out how to make it so the ball actually goes up in the air in the 2D view. You see, the nice thing about the 2D view is that you can see the formation and watch plays unfold before your eyes. It's ideal if you actually want to, be the manager. In theory, you could do the same thing with the aerial camera if you could, actually see your players. As cool as these up-close views are, the truth is that you can't see what your formation looks like or if you need to change something strategically. That's the reason why the old 2D classic view is so wonderful. You can see everything you need to know at once without the stupid animations getting in your way. Now the truth is that the 3D camera angles obviously are not going anywhere. Sports Interactive likely moved in that direction in part because of the popularity that the game received through YouTube, especially during COVID. I mean, if you want to know why Football Manager suddenly was able to attract 5 million unique players or a rumored 10 million unique players for FM 2024, you really do need to look at the content creators. I mean, there's no secret that guys like Tom FM have managed to attract hundreds of thousands of subscribers and millions upon millions of views. As much as you might laugh at some of these guys, the view numbers are really impressive, and there's no doubt in my mind that people have discovered Football Manager thanks to the likes of Lelujo. Personally, I remember frequently going back to Omega Luke's videos on Wonder Kids during the dark days of COVID, back when I stopped caring about real life and started caring more about my FM21 save. And the 3D graphics, those are really the things that sell those saves. The 2D classic view is much better if you're seriously managing the game, but the 3D graphics are the things that get views. However, note that none of the top videos for any of those creators came out after FM 2026 was released, right? That's what we call a clue. The other clue, of course, is the fact that Football Manager 26 has been hit so heavily by negative reviews and general negativity in the community. While it's too early to say for sure, the current sign is that Sports Interactive likely made a big mistake by pushing everything over to Unity so quickly, and the player base has really punished the company for it. And honestly, if Football Manager 27 doesn't recover from the huge loss in players that hurt Football Manager 26, I'm worried that the company might not have any future at all. So I know that it's a doomsday message, and I know that there are people out there who really enjoy FM26. And hey, I'm also partially responsible for the negative sentiment around this game thanks to videos like this one. But the truth is that the franchise has not seen numbers like this since before Football Manager 2012. And the lack of communication by Sports Interactive really does not make me confident. Again, as cool as camera angles like these might be, I do have to wonder why we had to give up so much to get to this point. I still don't understand why Sports Interactive absolutely had to get rid of the old 2D classic engine just to give us something that looks like this. Even given the fact that the old graphics engine didn't make full use of graphic cards, was the 3D rendering really all that bad? And seriously, what in the world was so bad about this? Why didn't we just stick with this view? Anyway, so there you have it. Maybe it's too early to call it the fall of Football Manager's 3D engine, but in all seriousness, versions of this game that came out 10 years ago are more fun to play than the version that came out 5 months ago. And the earlier versions look better too. As I've said before, if you're frustrated with Football Manager and Sports Interactive, like I am, just do yourself a favor, go grab one of the older versions of the game and just give it a shot again. It's still as much fun as it used to be, and it will take your mind off of Miles Jacobson and his many broken promises.